360 persons have been killed by terrorists in the first quarter of 2022 in Kaduna State, according to the state government, a figure that has alarmed the authorities. That casualty number is besides the over 1,300 persons that were kidnapped under the period, which is why Governor Nasser El-Rufai is meeting everyone within the hierarchy of leadership here at the government house as it reveals a disturbing development that drives terrorism.
The first great concern is the emergence of Boko Haram terrorist enclave, as well as the activities of Ansaru, particularly in Birnungwari and Chikun local governments. Amongst those kidnapped from the train, Abuja-Kaduna train, was a former roommate and classmate of mine. Throughout the period that he was in captivity, it was very clear that the terrorists were making comments like the forests in Kaduna are even better than Sambisa, so they should all relocate here. I think this is an area we should be very concerned about, and this is why we've been making the point that the problem of insecurity now has moved from the northeast to the northwest.
With terrorists now making major inroads into the northwest, the state governor also raises concern over a possible threat to the 2023 election if nothing is done.
If we don't improve the levels of security in some of our local governments like Birnungwari, Chikun, Giwa and Igabi, it may not even be possible to hold elections in those local governments. And if we cannot have elections in 4 to 6 local governments, I wonder whether it will be possible to have elections at all in Kaduna State.
With this revelation by the Kaduna State government, arguably nothing is of greater priority at the moment beyond ensuring the security of lives and property, as about 60 people are still being held captive by terrorists from the March 28 Abuja-Kaduna train attack in Chikun local government area of the state.
Well, I'm sure that editors must have been spoiled for choice as to what line to start with in terms of taking a headliner from that particular briefing. But I'm sure you heard many of the dailies went with the fact that Ansaru and the Boko Haram terrorists have now found a home in the forest of Kaduna, northwest Nigeria. Well, we're going to be discussing the implications of this with Kabiru Adamu, who is a security risk management and intelligence solution consultant, and also the founder and managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you, Mope. Good morning.
Good morning. You know, I'm just wondering which one of the lines to start with. First and foremost, it's notable to note that quite a number of states are beginning to have these security briefs. Just this year, at the beginning of this year, we heard from the Niger State government giving a brief. It was not even the end of January yet, and over 200 people, I'm trying to bring that up, 220 people killed and 200 kidnapped in the first 17 days of January alone this year. Now we're getting another figure from the Kaduna State government talking about how over 300 people have been killed and 1,000 more kidnapped in Kaduna State alone. What exactly are we looking at here? What's going on?
In simple terms, a deterioration of the security situation, especially in the northern half of the country. Like you said in your introduction, I do run an intelligence firm. Part of what we do is to keep a database of incidents around the country, and that is what our database has told us. In fact, at the end of that last year, we saw an 80% rise in fatalities in the north. When we compared 2021 and 2022, we saw a 40% rise from the two figures. In fact, when we compared the first quarter report released by Kaduna, and I must commend the Kaduna State government for collating these incidents and for analyzing the trends. That is the way to go. That is the modern way of approaching security. Perhaps in the course of our conversations, we would mention how to take that forward. But this is a good step. Now, it tells us where the gaps are. And clearly, from what we saw from those figures, Central Senatorial District in Kaduna is the epicenter of all of this crisis. Like the governor mentioned, Birnungwari, Chikung, Igabi local government. That is where all of this is happening. So as a security practitioner, if I look at that and I see the local governments in front of me, and I see where there are more reds than yellow or green, in fact, and I look at the resources at my disposal, it allows me to know how to deploy those resources, especially when those resources are not available. So to that extent, the revelations, the embracing of data by state governments is quite commendable. I must say that as far as I'm aware, and I do cover the whole 36 states and Abuja, there is no state government that has embraced the data like the Kaduna state government has done.
Well, nonetheless, what the data tells us is quite frightening. Even though, yes, as you rightly pointed out, it is important that we have this data because it's the only way we can, use it for any improvement in security, if we're going to see any improvement at all. The question is, now that we have the data, what difference is it really making in terms of what we're seeing? Are we just collating it for the sake of it? Are we really seeing an improvement? Because before now, we had been told about how much progress has been made, and I know that when we had a conversation with the president at the beginning of this year, that was the first concern we raised with him. He was quite optimistic and quite I don't know, I'm looking for the right word to use now. He was talking about the success that has been recorded in the Northeast in terms of one of the achievements in security. But when it came to the Northwest, he did acknowledge that is a challenge that we don't seem to understand yet. Initially, it was termed banditry. And then when we saw the scale of the killings and the style of the attacks, the bandits were now labeled terrorists. But in labeling them that, has it really changed the results that we're seeing? Because we imagine that to change the label was also to change how we approach them and perhaps to be able to nip this thing in the bud. But it looks like it's now finally grown into a full-blown tree.
Exactly. And this is like, I would refer back to my database. As far back as November 2021, we started reporting that, especially in the border area between Niger State and Kaduna State. And unfortunately, this is actually in the public space. You referred to a statement by the Niger State governor. He had severally mentioned the presence of terrorists in his state. Now, if you look at the border area, there is a coterminous border between the two states, Niger and Kaduna. That border area, especially the part that links Birnungwari, the presence of especially Ansarul Muslimina fi Biladi Sudan, the group that was called Ansaru by the governor, has been established. And in fact, the worrisome aspect is that they are recruiting actively within those locations, in several communities there. What they do is they use little influence, sometimes incentivizing residents with little money or protection. And then, residents out of fear or perhaps because they don't have any choice, embrace that olive, the branch that they are offering to them. And so before you know it, the various levels of participation of a person in a terrorist group starts exhibiting itself. It could be just, silent membership. It could be active support, or it could be, in some instance, informants, like the governor mentioned in his statement. So this is well established. And like I said, as far back as November last year, we started documenting that. It's evidential in my report, which is open to the public. Anyone who wants, go to the website, you see it. Up until our last report in April, we still mentioned that there is an active recruitment by this particular group, Ansarul Muslimina fi Biladi Sudan. Now, the governor mentioned Boko Haram. That is a generic word. Boko Haram represents, as far as I know, about 3 groups. And I think it's very important that we establish which of these 3 groups the governor is mentioning. There is the Jamaat al-Sunnah Lidawat al Jihad, which everybody knows, yeah, by Shekau. Then there is the Islamic State in West Africa province. Now they represent different objectives, and it's important that we know which one. He wasn't very specific, but it's important. Now that we know that, and to answer your question directly, there are 2 basic laws that determine or govern terrorism in Nigeria. The Terrorism Prevention Act, which was just repealed recently by the president, and a new law replaces it, which makes the Nigerian law now in compliance with international requirements. Now, a lot of us have not really contended with the consequence of that repeal and this newly enacted law by Mr. President. If before we were doing specific things that was more or less local to Nigeria, now this new law makes everything that we do compliant with international requirements. So your banking transactions, as an example, there are 5 components of the law which by, for instance, designating terrorist groups, bandit groups as terrorists, I expected to see that following. So as an example, their membership, just like the military did in the Northeast, I had expected that pictures of the leaders of these bandit groups will be put, in media houses like yours, as an example, placed on several places, so that as a Nigerian, I know who these groups are. We are told 2 names, Mbindiga and I think Mbanga. That is a generic word in Hausa, which refers to, vigilantes and all that. It's too generic to allow any action. We needed more. Who are their members? How are they generating their funding? How are they recruiting? I told you that we've documented how they are recruiting. So things like that would have followed, so that the various operational elements within our security architecture, we pick on those 5 things and start implementing them. Arresting those members that were mentioned, tracing their activities, how are they raising their funds, do they have bank accounts that they are operating, and several things. So once these various operational elements within the security architecture do that, they can now present evidence to the courts for their prosecution. Unfortunately, I'm not aware that that is being done at the moment.
Well, just before I take this to my colleagues, I'm wondering what do we know about Ansaru? How is it fundamentally different from the 3 other groups of Boko Haram which we know?
As far back as 2012, if I remember well, it broke out of the bigger group, Boko Haram, because of ideological differences. A lot of its membership leaders were from the northwest of Nigeria. So they started operating in Kano, parts of Katsina. You recall in 2014, when a French engineer was abducted in Katsina State. He was working on a solar power, an alternative power project, and he was abducted, I think in 2012 or 2013. Then another engineer was also abducted in Kano. Then in Birnin Kebbi, a Briton and an Italian were also abducted. All of these were related with the activities of the group. So it turned out that the major ideological difference at that point with the parent group, which is Jamaat al-Ahlussunnah al-Dawat wal-Jihad, was in terms of the methodology with which the parent group was trying to achieve its objectives. So suicide bombing, they felt that suicide bombing was not something they wanted to embrace because people were killed at random. So what they did was, do those abductions, specifically targeting internationals, and then they will now make political demands. When they abducted the French engineer in Katsina, one of the demands was that France should repeal its law on the use of veils by Muslims in France, and several other political demands. So that became obvious that, yeah, they were Nigerian specific, but they had an international agenda, as it were. So as a result of counter-terrorism successes by the Nigerian government, some of their leaders were arrested. Now they went underground from that 2014 up until 2018, 2019, when we started seeing videos and postings on social media suggesting that they were coming back again, and we're where we are at the moment.
Let's send this to my colleagues in Lagos.
Well, thank you, Mokwe. Well, one of the things that struck me the most in all that you've said so far, especially about the different groups, is a play on sentiments, which is quite strong, it would seem. In terms of dealing with that sentiment and thereby curtailing the real severity of the insecurity issues that has arisen as a result, what do we know about that? How do the security agencies handle the sentimental angle of this conflagrated insecurity?
I must say a brilliant question. If you look at the Global Terrorism Index, they singled out one particular aspect as the reasons why terrorist groups thrive, and that is their ability to exercise influence. And I think your question, really centers on that. Now, we have a national counterterrorism strategy. It's a strategy that puts in details how we should combat terrorism. My understanding is that we've not been implementing that strategy, actively. If I'm going to ask to give a range of what we've been implementing, I don't think we've done more than 30%. Also, unfortunately, it appears the military has been largely responsible for the implementation of that strategy, when the military is just one element out of the 27 ministries, departments, and agencies that we have in security. So to answer your question directly, I would hope to see a review of that national counterterrorism strategy. What are the gaps? Why have we not been able to, why have the other 24 ministries, departments, and agencies that are within the security architecture not been involved in the implementation of that strategy? Why is it that it's the military that is at the forefront of the implementation of that document? As an example, the National Orientation Agency has a huge role to play. Ministry of Information has a huge role to play in exerting and especially the counter-narrative against terrorism. If they go to locations, they use grievances, and that brings me back to Kaduna. The governor said a lot yesterday, but he didn't speak about grievances. What they do is they use grievances, whether real or perceived, to recruit from the communities where they are operating. And if you do not block or change that narrative, or even take active measures to address the real grievances, then you are allowing them that possibility to operate. So again, it has to be a concerted effort, both by the 27 ministries, departments, and agencies in security, as well as the whole of government, so that we address the root causes of terrorism.
You talked about the NOA, for instance, and one of the issues that have been raised, variously by NOA is that they do not have adequate funding to deal with the issues that they have to deal with, resensitizing Nigerians and all of that. On the one hand, that issue of funding, NOA cannot generate money on its own. It has to be funded by government, and perhaps the other 26 or thereabout agencies that are left in the list that you have talked about. Is this in any way suggesting some complicity of some ministries, departments, or agencies, or that it's because we have a funding problem that insecurity is persisting and government is handicapped?
I see it as two things. Number one, accountability within the whole government apparatus. I talked about the National Counterterrorism Strategy, and I mentioned that we need to review it. And it's really about accountability. If we do have a strategy and it's not being fully implemented, then somebody is not doing his job. And that brings me to your question, the role of the NOA. When COVID came, NOA went out and did a lot of jingles. In fact, very active. I'm sure your station too put up some of those jingles. Now that tells you something about priority. Perhaps COVID, because of the sentiment, both national and international, NOA prioritized COVID, when in reality, frankly, terrorism is killing and has killed more people than COVID. So perhaps because of that lack of accountability, they've not prioritized their participation within the National Counterterrorism Strategy. And that brings me to the next point. What kind of metrics, measurement, M&E, and evaluation mechanisms do we have within the government apparatus structure to see how these organizations are participating within the National Counterterrorism Strategy? And as someone who has studied national defense, I can tell you in all confidence that M&E, monitoring and evaluation, is largely deficient within the security sector. So perhaps one of the ways to go is to enhance M&E so that the participation of all of these agencies within the national defense policy, national counterterrorism strategy, and the several other policies that we have, including our terrorism law, is improved upon.
Would you say the same for our collaboration or a lack of it, talking to the various communities where these insecurities usually stem from?
Definitely. Yesterday, when the Kaduna State first quarter 2022 report was being presented, it was at the State Security Council meeting. And I was very happy to see traditional rulers as part of the members of that council. One thing that worried me is when the governor was highlighting what he felt was the role of three particular locations along the Abuja-Kaduna highway. He singled out three towns, as it were, on that road. And one of his recommendations was either to relocate those towns or to level it. I think he used that word. Now, how do you explain moving an entire community as an attempt to solve a security challenge that you have? What would be the feeling of the people in that location? I am of the advocate that instead of such attempts, which frankly are draconian and are not consistent with our democratic practices, perhaps we should look for a better way to involve those people within the security architecture. Getting the buy-in of residents of the location, just like you've indicated, is one of the key objectives of our national counterterrorism strategy. So instead of announcing or recommending measures like that would further alienate them, I talked about grievances earlier on, we should look for ways to enhance inclusion. Both diversity, equity, and perhaps even fairness are things that would help include those communities as against excluding them further.
Mr. Adamo, I'm glad you talked about architecture. I'd like us to look a bit more closely at Kaduna. You know, the state bears critical security infrastructure. There's the Defense Academy, there's the Air Force Institute of Technology, there's the School of Artillery. With this security architecture, why is Kaduna still susceptible to bandit attack?
Time would not allow me really to go into the details in answering your question, but in simple terms, the drivers of insecurity are, I think, more pronounced in Kaduna than several other locations, and I'll quickly mention some of them. Number one is the grievances that I talked about. There are three levels of these grievances: the political grievances, the economic grievance, and social grievances. You have a huge population that are either unemployed or unemployed, and they provide the pool upon which these threat actors recruit from. You have the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. You have political players who are unhappy with perhaps the nature of the state. Then you have the inability of the state government to also manage the security resources in a manner that would allow for the blocking of some of the security gaps that exist. And this is the lacuna within our constitution. It's not specific to Kaduna, but because of the circumstances that exist in Kaduna, it makes it more pronounced. You have its topography. It's the natural environment that Kaduna has, or what we call ungoverned spaces, forests, mountains that are quite vast in Kaduna. You have its proximity to states like Niger, Katsina, and to an extent Zamfara. These are states where you have the presence of some of these threat elements that are quite active. And because there is no effective and efficient way of managing the movement of these threat elements, it's easy when, for instance, there's a security force operation going on in Katsina or Zamfara for them to, or even Niger State, for them to move into Kaduna. Those grievances that I mentioned earlier on allow a value chain, as it were, for support for these systems. The governor talked about drug addiction. Yes, that is a fact, especially within vulnerable groups, the youths, to an extent women, and then the society as a whole, and several other drivers of insecurity that exist within the state. Unfortunately, that is what makes Kaduna. When the incident happened in Chikun local government, I did what we would normally do in secondary school. I took the protractor, placed it on the point where that train was attacked, and did a perimeter cycle round that place. And I came up with about 4 major security formations that were in close proximity to that center point, or where the attack happened. The question is, if you have that kind of presence, just like you mentioned, how is it possible that these threat elements are able to attack? We know where they are. That's one thing I want to emphasize. We know where these threat elements are, but something is stopping the security agencies from going after them, and that is what we need to address if we're going to change this situation.
Well, what is? Because I'm sure that this information which the Kaduna State government has put out is not to frighten people. It's so that action can be taken, and quickly too. Some people will say maybe you should have briefed the president in private. But, I mean, this is something that concerns all of us, and I'm sure that we need to, because he also said that he could have implications for the 2023 elections and its conduct in Kaduna. So what do you think, what should be happening right now?
So many aspects to your question. Number one, I know that Governor Rufai has briefed Mr. President in February and March after his state discovered IEDs in, I think, 2 local governments. He did come to Abuja to brief Mr. President, and he also, his government released a warning to residents telling them of the risk of exposure to IEDs in the state. Now, there is a lacuna in our constitution that I talked about earlier on. Security still remains in the exclusive list. So the governor is handicapped, but that does not excuse him from taking certain actions. And I always like to use the example of the Lagos State model. Lagos State has established a security trust fund that is being run like a private organization. It's transparent. We know how much money goes into that trust fund. We know the usage of that money. And if I'm right, Lagos State is the only state government that has that level of transparency. That is the way to go. States like Kaduna should enhance what they are doing at the moment by establishing a transparent system of running security. They do gather funds, they do collect the security vote, and we're told in that briefing yesterday that he supports the security agencies. But then there is no transparency around that support. Number two, we need to decentralize security. How we decentralize that, I think, should be a narrative that should be included in the debate around these 2023 elections. Candidates who are involved in that election should tell us how they intend to decentralize security in a manner that would not add to the further security challenges that we have at the moment. Issues around control, issues around the usage of security departments politically should be addressed. Any candidate who is able to tell us that, he has my vote. And I think that's what Nigerians should perhaps be calling for at the moment.
Well, I don't know. For the people who have heard this, I really feel very disturbed learning that this is in Kaduna, because I do know that the government has put quite a bit in place, inviting investors into the state with the investment summit every year. I don't know how business people will be taking this, if they should be afraid.
They should come to me.
What about the ordinary people? What can they do to help?
I just talked about that we're in a political season. Let's pick out. This is what we want. We want improved security. There are 5 coordinating elements within the national security architecture. We need to hold them to account. The Office of the National Security Advisor, the Minister of Defense, Minister of Interior, the Minister of Police Affairs, and 2 departments within the presidency. They need to speak to us. The governor has presented this, credible, no doubt. What are they going to do to address it? We need to hear that from these 5 elements that I mentioned.
Should we also be putting pressure on the presidency to speak to the issues raised by the Kaduna State government?
So all of these elements that I mentioned are representatives of the presidents.
Okay. Well, we'll see whether we'll get any further information, coming from Abuja now in response to what has happened in Kaduna. But indeed, we'll wait to see what will happen in the following days. We sincerely hope that action will be going on behind the scenes. We have to thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Thank you for
Mr. Kabir Adamu is a security risk management and intelligence solution consultant, and also the founder and managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited. Thank you once again for coming on. Thank you for We'll take a break now. We'll come back to discuss something that is not peculiar to Lagos, but Lagos has just recently taken some action on it. In just a moment, please stay with us.
Since that order came from the governor, there's been a lot of reactions. Yesterday, we hosted the Lagos Police Commissioner, who spoke to the enforcement on from the part of the police. But of course, there's been a huge backlash and a lot of reaction from a lot of people about that particular thing. The occurrence at the Ojo axis of Lagos is one of such examples. We have the Commissioner for Information in Lagos State here this morning for Information and Strategy, Mr. Gbenga Omotosho, to throw some light on the issues. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Clearly, it's not something that anyone is taking lightly, that backlash, and I'm almost certain that that's not the only report you have. Can you give us an inkling to how government is even handling all of that in the first place?
Well, before Mr. Abaide Sanwo-Olu, the governor, made the pronouncement he made, you could see from the footage that you showed that he had a meeting with all policemen, the DPOs, the area commanders, the commissioner of police. So it was very well planned and strategic, because we expected that kind of backlash that you saw. But let me just assure you, it's something that the law enforcement agencies are used to. So they were not bothered in any way. And we were not bothered because we knew that there was going to be resistance. People love a kind of laissez-faire situation where you can do whatever you like at any point in time. And if the law enforcement agencies and the government, they come out to say, enough of this, we don't want this in Lagos, this is not the kind of thing that we want in Lagos. I mean, naturally, human beings will resist. Human beings resist change. They don't want something that will make them go away from their old ways. And so the kind of thing that we saw yesterday is not unexpected, it's not new, and it's not something that the law enforcement agencies cannot cope with.
Well, if you could inform us about the strategy that is being employed. That's your office, by the way, Information and Strategy. So this announcement was made 2 days ago by the governor, right?
Right.
That it will take effect from June the 1st. So what does that, how does that work? Does it mean that as at today, which is May the 20th, that is about 11 days from June the 1st, those motorcycles can still operate within those areas?
First, there is a history to this. There is a law that says that those motorcycles cannot operate on major highways, major roads, and on bridges. So the law is still there. It has not been removed. When we made the pronouncement, when the governor made the pronouncement about 2 years ago, he has not reversed it. So it still stands. So if today, like what happened yesterday, that you saw, the enforcement that you saw, is not new and is going to continue, whether this June 1st deadline stands, but that will not stop the enforcement at all.
Help us understand why there is a June 1st date when there is a law that already forbade whatever it is that the governor is saying, the enforcement of it takes effect from June 12th.
We all knew what happened when that first pronouncement was made. It was well enforced, and even many of these people riding bikes were already leaving Lagos out of their own volition. Unfortunately, nobody thought at that time that COVID-19 could come upon us. And when COVID-19 came, the enforcement got weakened, and we couldn't enforce the restriction the way we ought to have done. So now that COVID-19 has given us some space, and our doctors are complaining that more and more people are coming with the emergency of Okada, about 1,712 accidents have been recorded in Lagos in the first quarter of this year. And of this figure, about 45%, to be precise, 767 of the accidents were caused by Okada. And it will shock you to know that the victims, most of them, at least 54% of them, between the ages of 30 to 39, our able-bodied young people, getting cut down like that, all because they mounted Okada. So the government felt that we should stop it. So the deadline is for them, like the governor said, to go and look for something else to do. There are many things to do in Lagos. If you still want to stay in Lagos and you want to be law-abiding, you should go and collect your LASTRA card and be an official resident of Lagos and find something to do. Artisans who left their jobs to go and mount Okada and riding all over the place should find reason now to go back to their jobs.
Unless we missed it, Ojo local government was not named in the list of local government the governor mentioned yesterday that would be affected. So if the timeline is to give the riders an opportunity to find an alternative to their trade, why did enforcement begin on that axis of Lagos State?
That's what I said. The law has been there. Ojo has highways. All highways and major roads in Lagos and bridges. These guys are not supposed to be found there. So if the deadline is first, like you said, the law is still there, it's not being repealed. So the old order is there, it's not being repealed. What Mr. Baide Sanwo-Olu, the governor, has simply done is to reinforce this order and to give these people an allowance, for them to be able to move out and find some other things to do or take their bikes away from Lagos to go to some other places. There are about 9,000 and something roads, 9,500 and something roads in Lagos. Of these, what we are talking about is just about less than 500 roads. So they still have other places to go to. But the thing is that
they'll be breaking the law in that process. If they go to other places, they'll be breaking the law.
No, what I'm saying is that 6 local governments now.
Yeah, I'm saying regardless. I mean, you've said that. Regardless, I mean, the law covers the whole of Lagos. So if you're saying that they should at least leave those 5 or 6 local government areas and move to others, they're still breaking the law.
The law covers all highways, major roads, and bridges.
Regardless of the local government.
Regardless.
So they actually shouldn't be operating anywhere.
They can operate on inner roads in all the local governments that were not mentioned. But the local governments that were mentioned, they should not be seen at all. They should not be seen, they should not be heard, they should not be felt.
What about the highways in the other local government areas?
The highways in other local government areas, they must not be seen there. The bridges in all other local government areas, they must not be seen there.
Yesterday, the police commissioner was confident in his assurance that the police has the capacity to enforce. But what we saw yesterday in Ojo local government, particularly in the videos that went around, were policemen docking the attack by rampaging Okada riders. This leaves further a question mark on the capacity of the police to enforce this law. So what if another situation arises where there is tension? How can the police then deal with it if they were unable to rein in on the Okada riders in Ojo local government?
Well, it's very nice that Lagosians saw what happened yesterday. Some perceptive Lagosians have told the government that these guys are violent, that these guys are not the kind of people you can handle with kid gloves, and that it's not just a matter of advocacy, it's a matter of enforcement, and not just enforcement, thorough enforcement. And that was what you saw yesterday that the police went there to do. At the end of the day, they were subdued. Once you have the law backing you, you do not have any weakness to go and do your enforcement. Whatever they may have done yesterday, the police tried to do use minimal force. But if there is need for them, if their lives are endangered, they could go beyond that. It's their trade, it's their job, they know it. So I would not want to speak for the police how to enforce this. But all I know is that they have the backing of Mr. Governor to enforce this law, and they are going to do it. But
what happened to tear gas? What happened to arms? What happened to them being able to shoot in the air to disperse the Okada riders?
All I'm saying is that these guys are professionals. They know when to use tear gas.
Because the police must also protect themselves as well.
Yes, they know when to use tear gas. They know when to use baiting. They know when to use all of the equipment, of violence, anti-violence equipment that they have. So I would not want to talk about the way they do their operations. They are in the best position to talk about that. But all of the things that they need to strengthen their hand to be able to enforce this law, the government is going to give them, and that's what Mr. Bayede Sanwo-Olu told them when he had a meeting with them. This is the first time in a very long time that you find a governor meeting DPOs, area commanders, commissioner of police under one roof. So it's a very serious matter. The enforcement, the police are ready to do it. You saw then that they were applauding Mr. Governor when he made the pronouncement.
Let's quickly speak to figures, if we can, because I imagine this is guiding the state in making this decision. Do we have an idea just how many motorcycles or motorcycle riders will be affected by this ban?
That is just the problem. These guys are not registered.
So we don't have a figure.
I mean, if you look at motorcycles operating in Lagos, most of them don't even have number plates.
But they have unions. They have people that collect taxes from them.
The unions themselves will tell you that they cannot account for many of these people. These are guys whose bikes don't even have number plates.
Interesting. So on the back of that, let's imagine we have maybe 50,000 that will be affected. Just imagine, hypothetically, if you're saying that they can now go to other places like, you know, the inner parts of the city and all of that. Wouldn't this be crime displacement, as it were? Because imagine 50,000 taking off the highways, now going into those areas. Aren't you worried about what will happen to crime rates and security in those inner areas? Is that not what, are you taking on board?
All of these reasons were put on the table before Mr. Governor made that pronouncement. People, what will they be doing now? What are they going to be eating?
This is about the
will crime rate not go up?
If they have to go to those inner places.
And all of that were put on the table. But the situation in which we found ourselves, we said, okay, this problem, if you cannot bend it amend it and see a way where everybody can have a win-win situation. You have to end it. And the government decided that we have to end it. So if you are going into inner areas and all of that, Lagosians are prepared. The law enforcement agencies are prepared. Anybody who feels that because he is riding an Okada and he's been asked to leave a place and he is going to another place and is going to start to do crime there, he will meet the law right there.
Okay. I'd like to go back to Old Ojo Road. I'm quite familiar with that route, and this is not to justify, the heavy presence of Okada riders on that route. Because Old Ojo is practically impassable, and the presence of articulated vehicles on Lagos-Badagry Expressway, you find that workers, commuters, have no choice but to enable them meet their targets and work routines. They resort to the use of Okada riders, particularly because of the traffic gridlock on that road. How soon will the inner city roads, particularly Old Ojo Road, receive the attention of the Lagos state government? Because from Maza to Abule Osun, the road is impassable.
As I speak with you, Old Ojo Road, if the contractors are not there, they are preparing to go there. The government is going to work on Old Ojo Road. And that access, that corridor, has caught the attention of Lagos state government with the provision of more BRT buses. And don't forget, that is where we have the Lagos-Badagry Expressway, which we are working on seriously. And apart from that, is part of the places where the rail that is coming will be going to. The Marina, Okokomaiko, Maitu, the Blue Line, we pass through that place. So everything that we made commuting a very sweet experience on that corridor is being done. The Old Ojo Road that you are talking about is part of the priority roads of the state government. If the contractors are not yet there now, I'll be surprised. They will be there any moment from now.
One of the concerns that a number of people talking about the inner roads that Kayode and Bukola have asked is, that it's like the last mile mode of transportation for many people that drops them at the foot of their doorsteps. So I'm wondering if indeed the government factored in that concern that so many people have. I know that you want to speak to the last mile buses and all of that, but the issues that people have to contend with the ban on Okada in Lagos, we both know is a Herculean task. Is government really ready for the backlash?
Of course, I do not know the kind of things that you are thinking about, the backlash. We talk about people having Okada as their last mile means of commuting, that drops them right at their bus stop or even right in their bedroom. The simple question to ask is that Lagos is the smallest state in Nigeria, yet it has the highest concentration of people, the highest concentration of black people in the world. I came into Lagos when I was really young, and I never experienced any Okada, people riding Okada as a means of transportation. Lagos has not increased in size. It's still the smallest, the tiniest state in Nigeria. So why is it that people talk, they make so much noise about, so much song and dance about
the population in Lagos has
from
increased.
Somewhere.
I don't know when you came into Lagos, but clearly it was a population 20 million or more at that time.
If the population has increased, the land size has not increased. That's what I'm saying.
And I think
so
it goes
where
back
you need to walk, it's still the same distance.
Well, it is not the same distance with Lagos traffic, and I think that's the point we're trying to raise here. The transportation system in Lagos. Can Lagos really fare without these guys? I mean, you can see the demand for it is high. I saw a video recently where it was like a sea of motorbikes, and there were people on them. So speak to us quickly. Is the goal to have a Lagos without motorcycles? Is that the goal?
The goal is to have a Lagos without motorcycles, because there is no megacity in the world that you go to and then you find this kind of mode of transportation. It's not done, and then Lagos doesn't want it, and that is why we are doing everything to ask our people to embrace the waterways, for example.
When do you want to meet that goal, Lagos without motorcycle?
We are working towards it. That is why we say Greater Lagos. We are working towards it. And apart from that, if you consider the security implications of having Okada running around the whole place, Lagosians are now complaining. Yesterday, people in Lekki, they had a press conference to say they don't want Okada. The other day, people in Ajao Estate, they came to Alausa to say they don't want Okada. Everybody is complaining, nobody wants Okada.
But Commissioner, pardon me, let's still talk about this transport system in Lagos. I mean, how well are you able to handle that? I know there are plans for, the rails and others, but as of today, take for example this Berger access. You know the amount of traffic that is there. And that is essentially caused by yellow buses who park right there on the highway to pick passengers. So if we say that, oh yes, we need to take the bikes away, we have alternatives, but there's still the challenge, for example, with yellow buses. I imagine that the Ministry of Transport or LASMA can go there and see those issues, because that is what causes traffic, makes commuting in Lagos hell. I mean, if you mention Lagos, the next thing you say is traffic. So is that something you're looking into as well, sorting out the yellow buses? I mean, sitting in them, you literally sit on wood and metal. I don't know if you've been in any of these yellow buses in recent times. So is that something you're also looking into? Because that's what adds up to make commuting in Lagos very difficult.
Yes, that's what we are looking at. But first, let me just tell you that the kind of problem you have described now, I know it is real, but in most of the cases, it's just a human problem. I mean, the signs are there,
or
no parking here.
Problem. Because you see the officials right there staring.
You see, if you see our people when they go overseas, where they have just a simple road sign, no parking there, nobody will park there.
Because they get a parking ticket.
But,
so do we get that here as well?
Of course we do that, and people grumble. And they put everything down to economy. Nobody wants to obey the law. So we have to even talk to ourselves as human beings, as Lagosians, that we are proud people who pride ourselves in calling ourselves Lagosians because we obey the law, because we are cultured, because we are civilized. So anybody who is parking his vehicle, whether it's a yellow bus or a private vehicle where you are not supposed to park, the person is behaving like not a typical Lagosian, not the kind of Lagosian that we will encourage. So the law is there. Last man is doing his best. The place that you have just mentioned is outside their jurisdiction.
No,
but I wouldn't want to say that.
I see them there, and most times they're looking away. You see the yellow buses parked right there on the road, and you can imagine the traffic all the way to the Otedola area, and it spirals all the way back. So I imagine that this will be looked into. But also, I know a case has been made by some of these riders recently, I think it was yesterday, saying that, well, a lot of them stay in Lagos, they vote in Lagos, and I think this proposal is being put forward. Lift the ban, and we'll vote for you. And I'm talking about the governor. Do you think that's a fair proposal?
It's in my own view, it's preposterous of anybody, absurd, ridiculous for anybody to say, for our votes, come and mess up Lagos. No, Mr. Baide Sanwo-Olu, the governor, is not going to do that.
And I'd like to add to that, are we going to see a relaxation of enforcement, perhaps in December or in January, a few months to the election?
If anything, it's going to be a reinforcement of the enforcement.
Okay.
It's not going to be ever a relaxation because of politics or whatever. No.
The challenge that, the reason we are asking these questions, Mr. Motosho, is because it's not the first time Lagos State will propose this, but it goes way back 2006 to the government of Tinubu and the government of Fashola and the government of Ambode. Every government since 1999, since this Fourth Republic began, has made pronouncements about the Okada rider. Minimal restriction, partial restriction, full ban, and all of that. And we always come back to this point of discussing it all over again. Is this the last time we will have this?
This is the last time we are going to have this.
What's the assurance?
The assurance is that, like I told, this is the first time you find the governor meeting all police DPOs and area commanders. And that is just one level of the security aspect of this whole thing. There is another level which is also working through. And I've told you everything that the law enforcement agencies need to, in terms of equipment, in terms of welfare, in terms of encouragement, they are going to get.
Okay.
I assure you, if there is anything, Lagosians have cried enough about this thing. So it's going to be enforced.
Okay. Malcolm has a question for you. Malcolm.
Mr. Commissioner, good morning. I have two questions. I've been told I can only ask it once, so I'm going to wrap the two questions in one. First, this menace, which you now consider Okada riders to be, there are going to be questions as to whether or not you're also seeing the kekes as the tricycles as a problem as well. Do you see the problem moving now to the tricycles, one? And then two, did you ever have a problem with implementing the laws which the Lagos State government had set out? I mean, given the fact that Lagos State government doesn't have its own police, but has to rely on the police provided for by the federal government. Did you ever, at any point, have a problem with implementation?
Like I said before, if you go back to the past 2 years when this pronouncement was first made, it was well implemented, it was well enforced. The police were there, they were dutiful, they were diligent about it. But unfortunately, we had COVID-19, which nobody planned for. It was an emergency, a calamity that affected everybody. So there was no time for us at that time to really concentrate on implementing this law. And the guys who are bringing Okada into Lagos, they just saw that loophole and then exploited it and brought Okada in. And unfortunately, the insecurity we have in some parts of the country is not helping matters. People are leaving their farms, they are leaving their places of work and then coming to Lagos to make ends meet by riding Okada. And we have considered this, that people are losing their limbs, they're getting their heads smashed. So we need to go back to the drawing board and ensure that this mode of transportation is banned in Lagos, and we shouldn't be having it. So we are not going to have any problem with enforcement. I'm talking about keke that you spoke of. I mean, is the cousin of Okada. I mean, at times they do the same thing. But the law too that bans Okada also bans keke. Keke should not be found on major highways and bridges in Lagos. And I hope that the guys who are running that kind of business, they are also thinking of having another thing to do. Because by the time the ban becomes, Mr. Governor said it's the first phase, it's a first ban. By the time it becomes an encompassing thing, I do not see why people will not say, we say that they do not have enough notice to go and find some other thing to do. So enforcement is what people are afraid of, and they feel that the government will want to go back because of politics or for whatever. But I have told you, you have seen it. Mr. Governor himself has spoken. He's a man of integrity. He's a man of his word. He's going to ensure that whatever it takes for us to enforce this, we are going to enforce it. And we have been encouraged by Lagosians who have seen the danger, who feel that, well, if you want to consider that you are moving by Okada from one place to another, and it's very fast, it's very efficient, it's whatever advantage of it.
Mr. Motosho, let me quickly clarify what you've just said in respect to the keke people. What you're saying, if I understood you clearly, is that Okada is the first phase, and that as time goes on, you could also be extending what you have done with the Okada people to the keke people.
No, the law that bans Okada also bans keke. Keke should not be found on highways, should not be found on bridges, should not be found on major roads in Lagos.
Let me add to that. Let's clarify. There are trunk A roads, there are trunk B roads. So can keke be found on trunk B roads that are not necessarily expressways, not bridges? Can keke be found on trunk B roads besides the inner city roads?
Major roads are quite clear. If you look at a road like Thormilan Bridge, like Ikorodu Road, like...
those are major highways.
Those are major highways, and then roads like the one that leads to the Airport Road, and all of those places, they are not supposed to be found there.
Okay. But where are those? You said that they bring bikes in. Do you know where these motorcycles come from?
That is the mystery that Lagosians are worried about. They don't know where they come from. The riders are unknown, most of them. They don't even have a number plates. Come and take class trackers so that we can account for you. They won't come.
So what are you doing with those motorcycles that have been confiscated? What is the plan? Are you returning them? Is it back to sender? Are you destroying them? What exactly is going on?
We have shown pictures of how they've been crushed.
So everything will be destroyed?
Everything will be crushed. They are being crushed. And we are going to continue to show pictures of the bikes being crushed.
Okay.
To show people that we are very serious, and to show those who are bringing them in that enough is enough. They shouldn't bring them into Lagos anymore.
Yes, no. Just yes, no. Does this invalidate the provision of the law that talks about 200cc capacity bikes?
No.
Okay. Mr. Gbenga Motosho is Commissioner for Information and Strategy, Lagos State. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for your perspectives.
Thank you.
Just one more issue right after this break. Stay with us.
Well, we have been asking you to go get your voter card, but beyond that, are you also a member of a political party? If you are you between the ages of 18 to 40? I don't know what the age range is for young people these days, but I would safely say between the ages of 18 to 40. Are you a member of a political party? Do you intend to join? If you do you have a criteria for those who are aspiring for office? Have you been selected a delegate? What qualities would you be looking out for amongst the aspirants who are going to be asking for votes at the convention? This is some of the questions we're going to be asking this morning, and right here in our Abuja studios, I have with me Mr. Timothy Osadolo, who is the Deputy National Youth Leader of the People's Democratic Party. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I also have right here Ibrahim Farouk, who is the Program Manager, Governance and Development Program with Yaga Africa, and also the National Coordinator of the Not Too Young to Run movement. Welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you, Maupe.
And right there in Lagos, we have with us Mr. Abayomi Oyalowo, who is a member of the All Progressives Congress. Good morning, Mr. Oyalowo, and welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Good morning, Maupe. It's Ayobami, not Abayomi.
Ayobami, my apologies. And that's exactly what was written, but I think I misread it. My apologies, Mr. Ayobami. Let me start here, right here in our Abuja studios, and by asking you, Mr. Timothy Osadolo, because you are the Deputy National Youth Leader within the PDP. I know that the convention is just a few days away, and the aspirants, especially the presidential aspirants, have been going around to meet delegates who will be voting at the convention which is coming up. What criteria? I do not know if you have been a delegate before. If you have been, can you confirm if you have been?
Yeah.
You have?
Yes.
When you were a delegate, what criteria were you looking out for amongst those who had come to woo you for your votes?
Well, first and foremost, what you look out for is capacity, competence, then character. Because if you lack these 3 C's, I believe strongly that it's either you're on the wrong boat or then you are doing something utterly different from the normal. Because when you come outside for a particular position, it is expected that you have your heads on your shoulders and you know what you are going in for, and you have capacity to deliver on that job or on the mandate which you are seeking for. Unlike what we have now, though sometimes we get deceived by people, by track records of people, like what we have currently now in Aso Rock. We were misled by the antecedents and the aura built around, the myth built around the personality we have there now. But time and the environment of office has exposed the fantastic flaw that he is. So going to this next convention and subsequent conventions, one will have to take a forensic look at those appearing before us so that we'll know what to do. So that the mistakes of the past, just like the Bible said, that affliction will never arise a second time. We will not commit ourselves into another shithole like we are currently now. Capacity,
competence, and character. 3 C's. I wonder whether these words mean the same thing in the political terrain. And I have to put that to you, Mr. Farouk, because you are the expert here on governance and development. We haven't quite seen development. I mean, over time, maybe in some areas there's been some development, but overall, we know that where we are right now is not where we ought to be, especially when we talk about security, unemployment, etc., etc. So these 3 C's are extremely important, but they would require a deeper definition, a clearer definition in terms of what sort of capacity we're looking for, what sort of character we're looking for, and what sort of competency we're looking for. Can you further define this for us?
Thank you very much, Mape. I totally agree. And when we talk about competence, for instance, it's the ability to deliver. Are you able to say these are the promises, make those promises and actually follow through with them. To also ask, is there a track record that we can show? And I think that also speaks a bit to capacity. I think over time we've seen many individuals who want to run for public office and sort of just spring up from out of nowhere without a track record, without something to hold on to say, you know, I have done this, I have worked in my community, I've participated either in the party or in civil society or in some aspect of life. And when we talk about character, it's about seeing many different individuals who, when you do a deep dive into some of the things that they've been involved in the past, for instance, it leaves you wondering whether these are the individuals that we want to have in public office. So I totally agree with the Deputy National Youth Leader around competence, character, and capacity. But beyond just throwing those words around, it's a critical investigation into what those three words really mean.
Well, I do not know, because you were leading a Not Too Young to Run movement, national coordinator, and that was eventually passed into law, which was one of the good things. But there have been questions as to whether or not young people have now been schemed out. We're seeing the cost of even consultations, informal consultations, that is, and then the cost of nomination forms. That's another kettle of fish. But what are you saying in terms of the numbers of people who are going into, you know, participate amongst the young?
So I think that we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of young people who are putting themselves forward to actually run for office. In 2015, when we looked at youth candidacy, we saw that it was about 21%. But then in 2019, largely because of the Not Too Young to Run legislation that was passed, youth candidacy came up to about 34%. We're confident that we're going to see... Yes, candidacy.
It's very important to clarify that.
Yes, youth candidacy. Those weren't aspirants. Those are post-primaries.
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult to track the data around young people who are aspiring for office.
Okay.
Almost any Tom, Dick, and Harry can design a poster and put it on Facebook and say, I'm aspiring for office. But it's another kettle of fish for you to actually pick up a nomination form, engage with the delegates or whatever process that leads to candidate selection and emergence, and then finally be a candidate at the polls. But I think that from what we are seeing, there's huge interest. Young people are really interested in what is happening. I think there's a realization that our participation affects us in many different ways, and unless young people are at those decision-making tables, the decisions that affect us, we're not going to have any inputs in them.
Let me flip this to Lagos to my colleagues for the statement of Mr. Oyalowo on this.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark. But just before that, gentlemen, I'd like to appeal that we watch our language and avoid vulgarities so we can have a fruitful conversation. But let me come to you, Mr. Oyalowo. I know you're always quick to say you are exiting that young people bracket. You're almost 50 now.
I'm 49.
You're 49. There you go. So, but today you're still a young person. Even my father says it's young, and he's
well,
almost
young.
Oh, there you go. So, the conversation around young people is quite important. I know that the focus is on the convention, which is actually a major election before the main election. A lot of people don't pay attention to it, but essentially the destiny of Nigerians is in your hands. I'm talking political parties. And by the way, are you a delegate in this coming election?
No, I'm not a delegate.
You're not a delegate.
I was an aspirant who, well, just go ahead.
Okay.
I'll tell you what happened.
It's okay. So the question is just how close to the decision table are young people, particularly in your political party, especially in the build-up to this convention?
Okay, thank you very much. The young people have really picked up the interest over the years. What we have tried to advise them in the past, I think they are listening now. You see, if you remember in 2019, the moment the Not Too Young to Run bill was passed, rather than the young people looking at areas where they can really make a difference, everybody wanted to be president at that time, which for me was not a wise decision. However, this time we've had a lot of young people coming in to become, to run for offices such as state houses of assemblies, like we've advised them, House of Rep. Those are areas where young people can actually come in large number. And then we must understand, to be a delegate, there's it's a different kettle of fish. One, in my own political party, to be a statutory delegate, you must have held some offices in the past. And then you now The other ones that are not statutory, you'll have to apply for that. By picking a small year, you have to be an elected delegate.
Even though the Electoral Act doesn't recognize statutory just yet.
Well, yes, I'm only explaining to you how it works. Yeah. For those one, you'll have to apply to be a delegate. I didn't apply to because I don't want to, because I was an aspirant as at that time. However, you'll have to pick up a form very cheap. I think it's just 5,000, so it's not a lot of money to become a delegate for certain categories. So, for me,
what categories are there?
There are a lot of other areas. You can be a delegate in the state assembly election, the governorship election. You can be a delegate in the national election, which comprises of the House of Rep, Senate, and the presidential. So they are not all the same thing. Each category of delegate, you will have to pick where you want to belong to.
Is there a criteria for being?
No, there is no
other than just being.
No, if you are a card-carrying member and you are interested, you pick the form for it. Anybody can pick the form.
What kind of education should the delegates themselves have? Because as
they are very critical, like Okikiolu just said now. There's something very critical about them. They present to you, the general electorate, whom you will choose. You see, like I think it's Governor Rufai that used to say then that election is like a beauty contest. The most beautiful girl that doesn't come out cannot become the most beautiful girl in the contest. So if you are beautiful and you don't pick the form, you honestly cannot be reckoned with. Your beauty just remains in your house or wherever. So to narrow it down to election, aspirant of any category will depend on the delegates to become the candidate. Therefore, those who will be made delegates must understand that what they are doing is critical to the national election in the long run, because whoever they pick or choose automatically becomes the candidate of whatever party.
Is there a mechanism in the APC, excuse me, your own party, to ensure that the people who become delegates have, as I think Mr. Osadola said, have their heads screwed right in order to know the right person to choose for the job to propose for the job?
I don't know if you call it a mechanism, but you try to educate people, letting them understand that whatever you do, whatever you decide, will not just affect the destiny of your party, it will also affect the destiny of the nation. Because the candidates that emerges from aspiration and the primaries election automatically, and then you must also understand that aside from being delegate, let's not forget the fact that the Constitution recognizes 3 forms of primaries. You have we are talking about delegate now because we're all looking at indirect primaries now. But we have the direct primaries where every political party member who is duly registered can participate. Which
is clearly not the direction you're going for your party.
No, all options are open. Up to now, as we're speaking, I think for the presidential election, till today, nobody knows what is going to happen. Okay. It has not been picked, although everybody assumed that it is going to be the indirect primary. So we must understand that these things are there. You can do direct, you can do consensus.
Some people have also said that that's what your party has always
done. You can have consensus.
Let me quickly
No, don't forget that we had direct in some elections in 2019.
Okay.
For instance, in picking the Lagos State governors, we went through was direct. So that's what I'm saying. You must also understand that. Okay. So that is why party membership is actually more critical to this. Because if you are not a member, you can't even be a delegate.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Farouk this question, especially concerning the Not Too Young to Run movement. In the build-up to the Not Too Young to Run, activating the Not Too Young to Run law, one would expect that perhaps there should have been some measure of education, not just information, education to especially young people right now, so that they know the various elements that go into the political process, not just voting, not just being members of political parties, but actually positioning themselves for office. Would you say that we have lost something there, or we still have an opportunity in terms of that education?
I would say we definitely still have an an opportunity. And for us at the Not Too Young to Run movement, beyond just being a movement that successfully amended the Constitution to increase youth representation, youth participation, and youth inclusion, there has been a lot of political education, a lot of civic education, a lot of raising consciousness among young people, especially about the political process around constitutional amendment, which was one of the things that we did. I know the guest in the Lagos studio also made the very important point around political party membership. And for us as a movement, we have also encouraged young people to register as members of political parties, beyond just registering as members of political parties, also to ensure that you seek for leadership positions within those political parties, especially because young people holding leadership positions are able to represent the needs and the interests of young people in the party, and by extension, young people across the country. One of the things that I'm really glad about is that in the build-up to the 2023 elections, we're also seeing a lot of information around how party systems and structures work, how delegates are selected. There's an increased interest also from young people to participate as delegates. And I think this is an understanding, an increased understanding around the very important role that political parties play as that vehicle, as that mechanism towards getting on the ballot. And I can assure you that across all the various political parties, we're going to see many more young people as delegates for the various primaries as they begin from this weekend especially, and leading up to the conventions and the presidential primaries. And this is a reflection of the fact that coming from the work from the Not Too Young to Run movement, from other youth organizations within political parties, outside political parties, recognizing that importance of the participation of young people. I think that in a few weeks after the primaries, when we go back and we are telling the stories, we're going to be seeing how young people influence those processes.
Mr. Osadolo, my question is for you. In the run-up to the Not Too Young to Run movement, the argument was that let's give young people an opportunity in the leadership space, that perhaps they can make a difference and bring about the ideal leadership qualities that Nigeria needs to realize her full potential. And after that, you know, I think the statistics says that we now have about 6.8% of young people in parliament, both from federal level and across state parliaments. So, given that figure, what difference have young people, young legislators brought to the table since election in 2019?
Well, the political process is large, active, and upwardly mobile. And I can tell you, since this young, Not Too Young to Run bill came into effect, that youths and young people, particularly under that bracket, have tremendously increased their participation in the political space. And they have been very active so far, though we have also had some minuses in some of the persons that have benefited from it. But the overriding majority have been playing their own role and their own quotas, and they will look forward to maximizing the gains that are open for us to maximize in the political space as youths. Because if you don't engage the youths in these processes at this early age, when they become old, I wonder at when the experience that is required over time will be accumulated and maximized. You see, it's like the catching them. It is like a school. If you come in early as a youth, you learn on the job. That's the advantage, and more so, the energy you bring in and the vibes you bring, the positive vibes you also bring in, makes all of these processes tweak and work better for the general populace. Because even Nigeria itself, 45% of the population of this country, boys and girls, or the youth category, are within the age of 40 down below. So you cannot ignore such a class of people, knowing that these people will be around for the next 50 to 60 years. So you can't just wish them away. So it's good that this bill was passed, and the gains that they have made so far is encouraging, and promising.
You say it's a large space, and let's look at, you know, the federal parliament, for instance, where there's the talk about ranking, there are senior legislators and all of that. And if you compare that with our cultural ethos in the country, do you think that their expression, you know, the platform of expression for young people has been limited by the fact that they're intimidated by the older legislators in parliament?
Well, the thing is this: power is not given away as freebies. You must come and ask for it. If young people didn't have a platform to ask for it prior to the Not Too Young to Run bill, that has been corrected now. We cannot participate in the processes. Like in my home state of Edo, the speaker of my state is not even 40, and is coming to the House of Reps, if God will, if he scales through the general elections. Now, if such a person gets re-elected and elected, the issue of ranking will also apply to him. Now, these old people that are in this political space, you don't expect them to just disappear all of a sudden if you don't take the fight politically to them, not physically, as in an ideological battle, like you have contributed, you are at your peak, and you are not your diminishing moment. Let these people with bright, fresh ideas also come in. Though most of them are still good and intellectually mobile, but we know that generally the National Assembly, which we are talking about particularly now, some of our elites see it as a playground for them, where they go to take their pension and retire. It ought not to be so. It ought not to be so. It's not a playground for adults.
Indeed, and it ought not to be. I mean, I think a lot of people will agree with you on that. I just want to ask you, talking about competence, you talked about how young people need to take over so that they can learn on the job. But some people will argue that where we are right now, it's not a place for people to come and learn on the job. They need to already have some experience to know what to do when they get there. For those who are aspiring for office or those who will seek to aspire in future, how would you advise them to garner this experience so that when eventually they get the chance to be in office, they can actually deliver or hit the ground running, as we like to say here?
Well, first and foremost, nobody runs isolatedly. You run on the party's platform. And every serious political party has a manifesto, or should have a party manifesto, where the candidates with their own manifesto should marry their own personal manifesto with that of the party and run along with, supposedly. You see, the fact that the system we are in doesn't place emphasis on what the manifestos are prior to now. It is now that Nigerians are now asking questions. We are becoming woke and asking, what do you bring to the table? What does your party bring to the table? You see, that is part of the political evolution process that is ongoing now. Prior to now, we will just say, Babajide is running. Hey, I like Babajide, he's a rich man. Oh, I like Babajide, he's a
those
stand man.
sentiments still very prevalent?
Not as it was before. Now, people want to see what your track records are, what you have done with positions you've been given to before. They want to also see what your talking points are going forward into the next phase of elections.
Would you subscribe to a school for leadership for young people who seek political office?
100%. I subscribe to it wholeheartedly, because it is the much you have that reflects in what you give. It is not. There's no rocket science about it. If leadership is not something you sleep and you wake up into, you must build yourself into it. So if there's going to be a leadership school or where people go for refresher courses or fresh courses, it's a welcome development.
We've seen quite a few spring up. I mean, we've seen one in Kaduna, we've also seen one in Lagos. We do not have enough of this types of schools. Would you advise, what exactly should we be doing to ensure that leadership is, well, because we all talked about how leadership is the bane of our development. How do you think we can ensure that many more of the schools, credible schools, are brought to bear in a place where we're in dire need of leadership?
Mape, I think this is a very interesting conversation because I think ideally political parties should set up leadership schools because political parties, like I mentioned, are responsible for leadership selection, so to speak. However, we've seen with many political parties where it is an all-comers affair, whether you have any sort of leadership skills or not. And this is calling out the political parties to say it is not enough to just have an all-comers affair or to say, yes, we subscribe to the notion of a leadership school. There's the Office of the Youth Leader, the Office of the Deputy National Youth Leader, who can propose these kind of innovative ideas within the parties so that young people within the parties go through this leadership process, and when you get to the point of that question around, are you ready, or do you have any experience, or do you have what it takes to be a leader, you're able to eliminate all of those questions because you have gone through that leadership process.
We have to be careful, though, because we have a pension to acquire certificates before it does happen.
But it's
maybe
still leadership school.
Yeah.
Maybe just to add, another thing that we've seen, and especially for young people, is saying, oh, you have no experience. But if you look at many young people who are currently in leadership positions, started from either student union, government, or some kind of community association, where they were either maybe a president or in some sort of leadership role. And that helped them to build that leadership potential and that leadership capacity and transmit it into public office right now.
And we know that student unionism sometimes is something that a lot of students do not want to go into, especially if you know you want to graduate on time. So, there have been questions around, is it very much the same way many people in the private sector treat politics? And I think that mentality is passed down to even those in the universities. If given that that's how our leaders are produced, and that is the socialization process we have for young people, I mean, don't we have a problem here? This question is for you, Mr. Yalowo.
How that is a problem from student unionism, maybe it could be like a stepping stone for you to begin to learn how to manage people, because as a student union leader, you are clearly managing your peers in school. So you can, we've seen a few student union leaders who have grown to become great leaders in the political space, and we've seen some who have refused to outgrow their childish ways of student, because student unionism could be childish at times, the kind of a looter mentality that never leaves you. And clearly in life, politics is not just about a looter. You must learn all manner of dynamics because you're dealing with a different set of human beings. So yes, student unionism could be a catalyst or a stepping stone to leadership in the original, the real life space, and it could also be an inhibition depending on the individual.
And let's speak to the transitioning now from student unionism to party politics, because that's where a lot of the action happens. You are a member of the APC, perhaps from the onset, and you've talked about how you also have a job on social media. I think, are you still with the CBN-owned NERSAL?
I left for now.
Oh, you left for now. But how are you handling it? Doing a job? Because young people aren't the fastest or quickest to join political parties.
The thing with people is we have made politics to look like a vocation, which is wrong. I've always said people should learn to have a job, not become a professional politician. Many people are professional politicians, and this is where the challenge is. Because when politics becomes your only vocation, then it's a do or die affair for you. It's a matter of life and death for you. But when people actually have something they are doing, politics becomes a way of service to the community, to the people. Now, this is what 1999 has brought upon us. It has dumped on us a system where people have come to abuse politics.
Is it the constitution or the political system?
The entire thing, from the constitution, from the way the politics was, because of the rushed transition, because of what had happened with Babangida deceiving people, when the time came for the proper handover, everybody was scared. Maybe it's another Maradonic way, people didn't get involved. Most of those who got involved are not supposed to be in politics. Unfortunately, the waters have been polluted. Today,
till today,
it's a carryover.
A lot of them are in your party, by the way.
Forget what party. This is not about party. Let's not make it about APC. I want to talk about Nigeria now, except you want me to do politics, and I'll start politics with you here. But clearly, we've had a challenge. We are people who held power from the beginning of this current set of politics have made it so difficult for new entrants to come in the sense that even from ordinary party primaries, the kind of money that goes into it, you must have to have committed a crime somewhere to be able to raise such money, and it is across party. Let's not make this about my party now. It is a challenge where we need to find a balance between, yes, you must have money, no doubt about it, but it has to be reasonable. And that is where we are talking about people having jobs, having businesses, having vocation, having trade before they come into politics so that they have something to do.
Sounds like you're saying that the young people have been blocked out.
They are not blocked out if they know what to do. The advantage of the young people is that they are in numbers. If they actually come into these parties in numbers, or maybe create a new party, but it's going to be very difficult creating a new party. But the existing ones are there for the taking. If the young people actually have a strategy in place, not strategy of running around, not strategy of hitting themselves from the back.
But you know that, young people are not, young people are not usually that patient.
That is where the patient must come in. I forgot this lady's name. I've been trying to remember her name. If you remember what happened in the last American election, a lady that took 10 years to build a system that helped a state that has never been Democrat become Democrat. It takes a while. It takes a lot of patience.
We're talking about transition.
So you must learn that patience. If you are not patient, you will get nothing.
We're talking about transition. I'd like you to speak to how it leads to, a stepping stone for young people to get visible in politics. How much of mentoring can aid a young person to become, something in Parliament or somewhere in the corridors of power?
It's a great idea. I mean, you look at a man like Rotimi Amechi, for instance. He was mentored by somebody who brought him in as his PA. He became Speaker of the State House of Assembly in Rivers State. Before he became the governor, today he's running for president. So it could be positive if you are two things. You have a proper leader who will actually groom you. You have your own mindset is right. I mean, you can also look at people like Raji Fashola, the Minister of Works, who was also groomed by an Ashwaju. Today, he's one of the best leaders we have in Nigeria. I mean, I remember just a few weeks ago, I think which state brought him to come and be a resource person to speak to their political appointees and everybody. So you could have the positive. Then you could also have the negative. I don't want to call his name, but he said he was a presidential aspirant last election. Who was he was a student union activist then, but he refused to outgrow that mentality. So it could be positive, it could be negative. It depends on a lot of things. You have a proper leader, and then you have a right mindset to grow. Because what happens in the university world is entirely different from the real world. So you must be able to gravitate and outgrow that childishness from the university where everything is, we must break, we must scatter, to understand that you must manage emotions, manage people, manage ego, manage all manner of things. So it depends on you and the kind of leaders you have around you.
I guess that's where character comes in. Those who are mentoring young people must choose those with character. Malkwe?
Indeed, let me quickly, as we wrap up now, let me quickly ask Mr. Sodolo, in 30 seconds, if you can you speak to delegates who are going to be voting at this, at the convention, at the upcoming convention of your party at the state and also at the national level?
Well, I would always speak to delegates in my party. I'll speak to delegates across all parties. In these forthcoming elections, think about your future. Think about your children, think about your security of your life, think about the economy of this country, and look at all the candidates before you and pick those one you think will best deliver on all of these issues that bothers every Nigerian. Because the Nigeria of today is not the Nigeria of our dreams. So let's look for a candidate irrespective of Naira and Kobo. Naira and Kobo should not play a determining role in who you are going to vote for. He may give you as much as 50 million naira or 100 million or even all the whole world in naira or in dollars or in whatever currency. Please, if you need it, receive it, but ensure, in the name of God, I beg you, ensure you vote that candidate that you believe and you know in your heart of hearts can deliver as a president when he emerges. That is what we need.
I like that advice. I know that's going to be a bit controversial, but, That's where we'll have to leave the conversation. Farouk, I've asked you for your closing comments, but we're totally out of time. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. I've been speaking to Timothy Osadolo, who is the Deputy National Youth Leader of the People's Democratic Party, Mr. Ibrahim Farouk, who is the Program Manager, Governance and Development Program, Yaga Africa, and also the National Coordinator of the Not Too Young to Run movement. Thank you so much for coming. And over in Lagos, we're speaking with Mr. Ayobami Oyalowo, who is a member of the All Progressives Congress. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for coming to this conversation this morning. Well, we finally come to the end of our conversation on Sunrise Daily for the week. Yes, for just this week. But of course, it continues online. Do feel free to send in your feedback and comments. Thank you so much for watching. I do not know if we're going to be able to take any feedback. We're totally out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Malkwe Ogun Yusuf.
I'm Kayode Okikele.
I'm Bukola Samuel Wemimo. Bye for now.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.